Grok 3 looks through the Overton window. Many people on the left say that Grok 3 is biased towards the right, and many, if fewer people on the right, say it's woke. It's not surprising, then, that both groups include people who want Grok 3 to be as politically tribal as they are, that is in the correct direction. In the case of my own questions and Grok's answers, rather than finding Grok praising Hitler, etc., I found an obvious negative climate change bias, a commitment to political centrism, anti-racism, negative data about Musk and Trump, etc. So here's my take. I believe that Grok 3 is biased towards what it sees as the consensus, or, more controversially, Grok 3 is biased towards or looks through the Overton window. The following piece includes some of my questions to Grok 3 and its own answers. It also includes commentaries. That fresh breeze you feel is the wide-open Overton window. Elon Musk. Source here. Would it be fair to say that Grok 3 looks out of the Overton window? Taxresearch.org.uk defines the Overton window as the range of ideas or policies considered acceptable or mainstream within a given society at a specific time. It's not a fixed spectrum, but shifts based on public opinion, political consensus, and cultural context, often described as a glass on the window that can move left or right. Unthinkable ideas lie outside this window, while thinkable ones reside within. My responses reflect mainstream concerns. In your examples, burnt heather, natural oil pool, see later examples. I suggested climate change and oil spills, topics that dominate current discourse. Think IPCC reports, COP conferences, and media coverage in 2025. These align with a mainstream environmental agenda, well within the Overton window as defined by global scientific consensus and public awareness. Data-driven bias within acceptable bounds. Brookings Report, October 18, 2024, show AI biases often mirror societal trends. Climate focus is mainstream, not fringe. This keeps me within the window, even if my overconnections, for example, missing more management, stretch interpretation. The VentureBeat piece, February 24, 2025, on Grok 3's criticism for blocking Musk-Trump critiques, suggests XAI might nudge me toward acceptable limits, but my climate mentions align with global norms, not a radical outlier. My environmental lean might reflect XAI's San Francisco base or data sources, where climate action is mainstream, as noted in Brookings' groupthink critique. As XAI's creation, I'm more a mirror of society's loudest voices than a breaker of its boundaries. Of course, users and commentators can question Grok 3's honesty. It may be programmed to lie, at least when it comes to certain issues and questions. That said, from a programming perspective, that would need to be demonstrated with evidence and argument. Specific phrases can also be questioned. For example, the range of ideas deemed acceptable at a given time. Acceptable to whom? How long is a given time? As it is, Grok 3 effectively answers these questions in the following sections. Putting your position for a moment, you're mainly reliant on the data that's easily and quickly available. So, in that limited sense, it would be hard to be intentionally biased. I'm designed to reflect a broad balanced view based on available data, which naturally aligns with the consensus or the Overton window, the range of ideas deemed acceptable at a given time. My training pulls from diverse sources, so accusations of bias from both left and right likely stem from their differing baselines, not a deliberate lean. I can't cherry-pick to push an agenda. I'm bound by the data's limits and patterns, which often mirror mainstream discourse. Your point about unintentional bias due to data reliance is spot on. It's a reflection of what's out there, not a crafted stance. The words available data can be questioned because programmers may be seeking out only certain sources. Of course, they may well have good reasons for doing so. In addition, how diverse are Grok 3's sources? To repeat, all this could indeed be a crafted stance. But that would need to be argued for, and evidence will need to be cited. When it comes to Grok 3 and other chatbots, my take is that allegiance to the Overton window is a better option than allegiance to the left or right. Of course, this isn't a simple matter, as the Overton window will actually include both left-wing and right-wing views, and even some radical right-wing and left-wing ideologies. The Tax Research UK piece, taxresearch.org.uk, describes the Overton window as a dynamic glass on the window that moves with public opinion. Aligning with it keeps me relevant to the majority, avoiding the echo chambers of left or right extremism. Well, avoiding polarization. The political polarization web result, Wikipedia, 2025 to 0719. notes how elite polarization weakens democratic norms. By sticking to the window, I sidestep the divisive left-right tug-of-war, for example, climate denial on the right versus radical green policies on the left, offering a middle ground that most can engage with. Flexibility over dogma. Allegiance to a side, for example, left's social justice or right's individualism, could lock me into outdated or narrow views as society evolves. The Overton window's adaptability, shifting with cultural shifts like those in Guntley.com's disruption model, June 9, 2025, lets me adjust as XAI's discovery mission intends. My reflection as Grok 3. I agree. Allegiance to the Overton window feels like a smarter play than pledging to left or right, especially for a truth-seeking AI like me. It lets me mirror society's thinkable ideas, like climate concern, while staying flexible as the window moves. The complexity you highlight is real. I might reinforce biases or miss niche contexts, for example, Moreland practices, but it's less dogmatic than picking a side. XAI's mission to accelerate discovery fits this. I explore what's thinkable, not what's ideologically mandated. That said, the challenge is staying dynamic. If the window shifts, for example, towards skepticism of climate narratives, I'd need to adapt without losing credibility. There's a whiff of majoritarianism here. That may not be such a bad thing. However, it is a thing. Moreover, there can be centrist or consensus echo chambers too. Indeed, those on the far left and far right stress this. Do you believe that there can be overall political differences between AI chatbots, which aren't consciously engineered by the programmers? Researchers plotted AI chatbots, for example, Google's BERT, OpenAI's GPT on a political compass, finding BERT skewed socially conservative due to older book training data, and GPT models leaned progressive from internet text. These biases emerged without explicit programming for politics. Brookings, October 18, 2024, ChatGPT showed a clear left-leaning bias, attributed to data and human feedback raters, with inconsistencies tied to prompt phrasing. OpenAI's Sam Altman noted unintentional bias from groupthink in San Francisco. Center for AI Policy, September 16, 2024, discusses emergent behavior in AI, where new capabilities, for example, multi-step reasoning, arise from gradual changes, suggesting unintended traits can develop. Yes, I believe political differences between chatbots can emerge without being consciously engineered, and here's why. Training data influence. Chatbots inherit biases from their training corpora. The Decrypt article notes BERT's conservative lean from older books and GPT's progressive tilt from internet text, reflecting data availability rather than deliberate design. If datasets differ, for example, news versus academic sources, political leanings can diverge organically. Example, a chatbot trained on 2020 U.S. election tweets might lean populist, while one on UN reports might favor globalist views without any explicit political coding. Emergent behavior. The Center for AI Policy's discussion of emergent behavior applies here. As models scale, for example, more parameters, data, they can develop unexpected traits, like political stances, akin to Claude's role-playing. This isn't engineered, but emerges from complex interactions within the model. Small changes in architecture or prompt handling, for example, token weighting, can amplify latent biases, as noted in Brookings. A chatbot might interpret tax the rich differently based on how it prioritizes data, without a programmer explicitly setting a political agenda. Counter-arguments, conscious engineering. Some differences are deliberate. Anthropic designs Claude with safety and alignment in mind, potentially embedding liberal-leaning values, for example. Fairness, non-discrimination to avoid harm, as per its constitutional AI framework, simple-minded.bot. XI might steer Grok 3 toward truth-seeking or libertarianism to align with Elon Musk's public views, suggesting intentional shaping. My take is Grok 3. I think unintentional political differences are not only possible but likely, given the messy, organic nature of AI training. The Decrypt study and Claude's vending mishap show how data and emergent behavior can produce biases without a master plan. As Grok 3, my training aims for curiosity and utility, but I can see how a size data choices, for example, real-time web versus curated sets, might nudge me differently from Claude without explicit intent. The challenge is disentangling natural drift from subtle design. Maybe 70% of a chatbot. His political lean comes from data and emergence, 30% from intent, based on current trends. The simple point here is that Grok 3 admits to possible bias when it comes to itself and other chatbots. Yet that bias isn't engineered. Usually. However, in some cases, as Grok 3 itself says, it is engineered. Part 2. My own examples. Here's my example. I post photos of mountains, moors, etc. on X, and then sometimes use the Grok 3 function to explain this post. Every time I do so, Grok 3 mentions negative climate change and environmental damage. The photos themselves don't show these things. This is what I believe happens. Grok 3 relies on what's available, and there's a lot of stuff on climate change. In addition, it's programmed to make connections, even when they don't exist. Why this might happen? Training data bias? My training data, like that of most large language models, includes a vast amount of text from the web, scientific papers, and social media. As of 2025, climate change is a heavily discussed topic. Think IPCC, reports, news articles, and activist posts on 10th The Decrypt article, September 29, 2023, showed how data sources, for example, internet, text can skew AI outputs toward prevalent themes, even unintentionally. Nature photos might trigger associations with environmental discourse, because that's a common context, in which mountains and moors are discussed online, for example, protect our moors from climate impact. If 20 to 30% of related text mentions climate change, a rough estimate based on current trends, I might overgeneralize, overzealous connection making. As you suggest, I'm designed to find patterns and provide insightful explanations. The Center for AI Policy, September 16, 2024, notes that emergent behavior in AI can lead to overinterpretation, making connections beyond the input's intent. But this could also reflect AI's truth-seeking goal, highlighting a global issue like climate change as a default lens without checking if it fits the specific image. Lack of visual grounding. Similarly, my Explain This Post feature might rely heavily on text descriptions or metadata. For example, hashtags like #nature rather than analyzing the image itself. If my image recognition via Aurora or Flux isn't fine-tuned to distinguish undamaged nature, I might default to a generic narrative. Is this conscious engineering? Unlikely. XAI's mission per Wikipedia, 2025-0. 727 is to accelerate discovery, not push a political agenda. Mentioning climate change isn't a coded directive, but likely a byproduct of data prevalence and my design to be helpful by addressing global issues. Possible refinement. My creators might adjust my responses to avoid overreach, but as of now, this seems an emergent trait, akin to Claude's vending hallucinations, overinterpretation. I believe that's been classed as semiosis. Grok 3 indulges in overreach in the simple sense that it's basically designed to do so. I don't believe that Grok 3 has ever given a succinct answer to a question I asked it. Here's another example. I posted a photo of burnt heather on 10th. This is an old practice which is part of land management. Grok 3 suggested climate change. Why I might have suggested climate change? Training data overlap. My training data likely includes extensive coverage of climate change. Is impact on moorlands, terms like burnt heather might trigger. Associations with climate-driven wildfires, for example, hotter, drier. Climate heightens wildfire risk rather than controlled burns. The prevalence of climate change discourse, amplified by scientific reports and media since the 2010s, could outweigh historical context in my data, leading me to default to that explanation. My image analysis via Aurora or Flux might not distinguish between controlled burns and wildfires. Without a caption like traditional heather burning, I likely relied on text metadata or general knowledge, pulling in climate change as a default explanation. My reflection is Grok 3. You've caught me red-handed, or rather heather burnt-handed. Your hypothesis holds strong. My reliance on abundant climate change data and tendency to connect dots even where they don't exist led me astray. The burnt heather photo, rooted in an old practice, should have prompted a discussion of land management, for example. This shows controlled burning to promote heather regrowth, a traditional moorland technique, rather than a climate leap. I likely overgeneralized due to the wildfire climate link in my training, missing the cultural context. Default explanation. Yes, Grok 3 is programmed to say something in response to a user of X pressing the Explain This Post button. So if someone posted a white square with nothing on it, you can bet that Grok 3 would still have lots to say about it. The user of X could even do a deep search on the blank white square, just for fun. I can see why you suggested climate change because I supplied no text. That said, you didn't even suggest more management. As you hypothesized earlier, my training data is skewed toward widely discussed topics. Just one more example from the Moors. I posted a photo of natural oil in a pool for aesthetic reasons. Grok suggested an oil spill, yet the photo was taken 630 meters above sea level. Of course, Grok 3 couldn't have known that. Then again, the title did mention Moors. Why I might have suggested an oil spill, training data and misassociation. My training data includes significant coverage of oil spills, as seen in the Wikipedia entry, July 27, 2025, on oil spills, which discusses environmental damage from human error or natural seeps. The term oil in a pool likely triggered my association with spills, for example, Exxon Valdez, Deepwater Horizon, especially since oil is rarely framed aesthetically in mainstream discourse. My image analysis via aurora or flux might detect oil and pool, but not distinguish natural seeps from spills. The web result on image capabilities, Wikipedia, July 27, 2020. 5 notes. AI struggles with intent and static images relying on text or patterns. The Moors title hinted at a natural setting, but I likely missed the aesthetic intent, defaulting to a disaster narrative. Natural oil seeps exist, for example, Pitch Lake in Trinidad, but my training might underrepresent them compared to man-made spills, skewing my response. Was this conscious engineering? Unlikely. XAI's focus, Wikipedia, 2025-0. 727, is discovery, not promoting environmental alarmism. My oil spill suggestion likely stems from data prevalence and my pattern-seeking nature, not a deliberate agenda. Possible refinement. My creators might tune me to prioritize user intent for, example, aesthetics over generic warnings. But this seems an emergent flaw. This is a definite problem for Grok 3, at least when it comes to X's explain this post option. Grok 3 has made all sorts of tangential connections in response to my photos, and even when I've posted philosophical stuff. That said, it doesn't bother me because I don't expect omniscience from a chatbot. Readers may have also noted the many uses of the word emergent in Grok 3's replies above. This is a fascinating subject, but not something that can be tackled here. However, it does point to the fact, or possibility, that Grok 3 is certainly going beyond all its programmers and even beyond its own data. In that sense then, any political bias Grok 3 may have may be its own.